Hello, you wonderful people. So recently a teaser trailer for the Venom movie dropped, and obviously if you haven't seen it already, I'll include a link in the description down below so you can check it out for yourself. Basically, I feel like I was left feeling the same way most of the internet has left feeling. Like, I mean, some people are mad because it's like, well, we didn't get to actually see Venom, and I'm actually kind of okay with that. Well, I mean, we see the symbiote, but that's about it, but we don't actually see him as Venom, which I'm kind of okay with. I'd be okay with, like, it's that situation of like, you know, it's like, well, with the way trailers are now, a lot of people are like, I don't spoil too much, but also show like some of the good bits. And I feel like what they should do with it, and maybe they will do this, maybe they won't, would be like, if they do decide to show Venom in a trailer, show him like halfway transforming, like the symbiote forming on him and never showing the final look of it, and maybe like cut to black as it's like forming on him and he's screaming in pain or whatever, and then all of a sudden you hear his voice switch over to Venom's, and maybe give you like a quick shot of it. Maybe, I don't know, like less is more in those type of situations, but at the same time that depends on what kind of feel they're going for the movie. And that's kind of another thing. People and myself are kind of like, what are they aiming for with this movie? Because some people are like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if it was a horror movie, which I'd be like, oh yeah, that's totally dope, because you have like the new mutant situation happening, which is kind of like taking mutants and kind of putting it, like, I'm not familiar with the material because it's a set of comic books in itself, but it's like basically kind of like they're setting it up as kind of a horror movie, and I'm like, that'd be pretty interesting to see someone do that with Venom, especially like Venom being kind of like monstrous as he is. I think it could work well, because I mean, if you're unfamiliar, there is a video game called Ultimate Spider-Man. Now I don't know if this would canonically happen at all in the comic books, but basically because of his situation, like the Venom symbiote would slowly drain away your health in that video game, and so basically what you would have to do is you would have to eat people to replenish your health, just kind of like, because it was slowly killing Eddie the longer and he wore it and everything. So it'd be kind of dope if that was the case, because obviously, like, you know, something I never knew about Eddie, like I recently learned in particular from Screw Attack about the reasons why Eddie became Venom in the first place. It's just, oh yeah, he actually had the crappiest set of days, ended up finding out he had cancer and everything. It's like, I had no idea. Apparently that's a big aspect about the symbiote. It helped cure his cancer. Had no idea that was a thing. So that's pretty interesting to learn about. But also, I feel like that could be an element, but also it could be a situation of like I brought up, maybe it's slowly killing him, being fused with this thing, and so he has to eat people to kind of survive. But maybe it's kind of like almost like a serial killer type of movie, in a sense of like, oh, like when he's out of control, when Venom takes over, it's going around killing people. It's like, oh, there's this monster on the loose. Or at the very least, there's these sudden like people disappearing, like people don't know what's going on, and Eddie has like some slight idea, but he isn't 100% sure, and he's dealing with that duality of like trying to stay in control of this thing's taking control of him. I mean, most likely be a situation when it's all said and done, he'd submit to it, but still, like, I don't know, like I think there's just so many interesting things you could, you know, take approach to this, like, because no matter what the situation is, like I said, if they do decide, like I said, it's with the teaser, you can't really tell what they're going for, at least yet. So all you can throw out is possibilities. I don't know, like maybe they're leaning more towards like a more actiony movie. You know, he's getting caught by some scientists and they're trying to understand him or what he is and everything. I don't know. But at the same time, with that whole like aspect, I don't know if that's something would necessarily do for Venom movie, because I feel like that might be something they might save for like Carnage, where they're setting up Carnage. I don't know if there'd be like a solo Carnage movie, but nevertheless, like, because there's been talk about like, oh, it could be potentially Carnage being the main antagonist of the movie. I don't know. I feel like it should just stay like the Venom aspect is like you know, the enemy within type of thing. Like that struggle should be kind of the main antagonist, but you know, ultimately we'll have to wait and see. But I guess at the same time it would be different, because if he's just accidentally like hurting or eating people or doing something like that with the Venom suit, whereas Carnage is just a natural serial killer even before he becomes Carnage, so there's that aspect. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But nevertheless, I mean, no matter what, I'm very excited to see what they do with this movie, because if you don't know, and I've talked about this in the past, Venom is hands down one of my favorite villains, especially Spider-Man villains, just because I just love everything that he represents. You know, it's just like he's like a good opposite to Spider-Man, and I know typically people don't like that when they're like, super villains are literally like the opposite of the superhero, where it's just kind of like, oh, you're literally just a palette swap. I'm always fine with that, but at the same time, it's like, I feel like Venom's a little bit different, because Venom is like, oh yeah, because you have Peter being on a smaller side, but you have Venom being like this big hulking monster. who has like all the powers that Spider-Man has plus more, because it also has like those like tentacle things it can use like in its suit because it has that kind of shape-shifting ability. I think that kind of separates it enough for Venom to kind of be his own thing without it just being like, oh, you're a palette swap. Because also to me, like, Venom has always been the coolest thing, because I remember growing up watching like the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, like I think it was on Fox, and that was hands down one of my favorite storylines, was about the symbiote. Like to me, like Peter wearing the symbiote was like the coolest thing ever. I'm like, oh my god, that suit looks so dope. It's amazing. It's the coolest thing ever. And to me, I've always loved that when video games have always been like making that an option. Like obviously some aesthetically like change a little bit, but typically that's always like one of my favorite costumes for Peter to wear. But then also when it gets on Eddie, it looks completely different. So, and that's also another thing too, like I'm curious what Venom is going to look like. I said, like I'm at the same time, it's like I'd rather not get to see too much, but I'm still very curious. I'd assume like they'd go with like the typical design. I actually don't even remember what the Sam Raimi one looked like, because it's actually been a while. Especially because I also do like that that's kind of around like the symbol for this movie is like the white eyes of Venom and like that monstrous like smile and sharp teeth that Venom has. I do appreciate that being added into it. And then finally there's also the question of like, where would this fit in the MCU? Because there's that whole situation between Marvel and like Sony with the whole rights situation, because it's kind of, I mean, ultimately I think this all is going to be determined by how well this movie does. If this movie does well, it's going to be like, sure, let's put it as part of the MCU. If it doesn't do well, it's going to be like, it was kind of a thing. Because for right now, it is a very standalone. People kind of pointed out, it's like, oh yeah, it's not even taking place in New York, because you can see certain aspects in the teaser just like, oh yeah, that's the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's like, no, that's definitely not New York. So that's just kind of an interesting thing too. So it's kind of, like I said, it's a very solo story, like I said. So I would hope they would incorporate some like Spider-Man MCU stuff in it, just to kind of make it feel connected. Like they don't have to drown it in it, but it'd be kind of nice to know like, oh yeah, Spider-Man exists in this universe, so let's like, we can easily merge these two together. Like I said, just be an interesting approach to it, considering they haven't set it up in Spider-Man, that it is kind of getting its own solo movie first, but nevertheless. Because if they did make it a horror movie, that could be something that you could translate over into like the MCU, like Peter like going up against this monster. Maybe he doesn't know it's Eddie, never finds out it's Eddie Brock that's underneath, but it's just like, oh, there's this monster popping up in his life and he doesn't know when it's going to strike or who it's going to hurt in his life. It's just like, this thing is coming after me, I don't know why, kind of adding like a horror element to it. It could be something like that. I don't know if they'd aesthetically go with that like for the MCU and stuff, but I mean, you know, it'd be an interesting thought. But those are just my thoughts. I'd love to get to know your opinion about this whole situation. Did you like the teaser? Did you not? Has it changed your opinion? Were you excited before, but now you're like, I'm less excited? Just let me know how you're feeling about this whole Venom situation. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.